Good morning, everyone. Dear students, welcome to our new lecture that's called Teaching Grammar to A1 level learners. We'll be talking about subject of grammar. We'll be focusing on selection of grammar materials, the requirements of CFR to assess grammar, and technologies of teaching grammar to A1 level learners. So that's what we'll be focusing on mostly in this lecture. So let's first talk about subject of grammar. What's grammar? Grammar is the system and structure of language. And this is language in general. And we usually can say it consists of syntax and morphology and sometimes also phonology and semantics. So this we'll be exploring today in this lecture. The grammar book and the grammar curriculum are like the luggage of an unskilled camper, as Michael West said. So, subject of grammar is the knowledge of how to construct a sentence. Grammar is concerned with the construction of oral and written sentence at the same time. Grammar describes an overall language. It uses a finite number of rules that can generate all the sentences of a language. So you build your sentences with the help of grammar, and you need the structure of rules at this point. Grammar can also explain the construction and even give an explanation why the sentence is constructed exactly this way. Sentences can be perceived as grammatical despite possible language inaccuracies and slips. For example, even if you make an error or a mistaken sentence, your sentence is still considered a grammatical unit. We have an aim of teaching grammar in English teaching methodology, and it is to develop learners' grammatical competence. Grammatical competence, we can define it as knowledge and ability to use the grammatical resources of a language. So your students not only need to know the rules, but to be able to have a grammatical competence, they need to be able to use and implement those rules in real life. Grammar actually is the total mechanism which a language possesses and through which its users are able to communicate with each other. Your focus in teaching grammar is for your students to communicate in real life situations. And grammar also refers to the rules for the correct use of a language which may be prescribed for the users. And we will be talking about descriptive and prescriptive grammar teaching in a little while. So, when you're teaching grammar, what aspect of grammar to teach? When referring to grammar, we're talking about grammar of words. We're talking about grammar of clause and sentences, the grammar of texts in turn, the grammar of text types, and even genres. And each aspect explores a different structural mechanism and set of rules that you need to focus as a teacher. Objectives of teaching grammar, it will help us to use the language effectively. With the help of grammar, your students know the rules and they can use the language correctly in a sentence. You need to develop students' insight into the structure of English language. You will be able to enable the students to assimilate the correct patterns of the language. When you teach one rule, they can apply this rule to similar different situations inside the language. And you'll be able to develop the mental abilities of reasoning and correct observation. Your students will be able to observe other students' usage of English, and they will be able to implement those rules in real life situations. And lastly, but not least, they'll be able to develop a scientific attitude in pupils when they need to be able to analyze these grammatical structures from the point of view of theoretical methodologists and linguists. So, how do we select grammar materials? So, we have active grammar minimum and passive grammar minimum. Active grammatical minimum includes grammar rules which are necessary for speaking skills. So your students will be actively using this minimum in their speech, oral, and written performances. And passive grammatical minimum involves grammar rules which are common for writing skills and which are passively acquired, which are understood and comprehended, but not actively used in speech. When we talk about criteria of active grammatical minimum, according to methodologist Jalal, he says we select this minimum according to widespreading in oral speech. So how often this is used in oral speech? We look at the modeling of these grammatical minimum. We will talk about it, it will it be able to become a model for creating analogical forms. For example, if we say kind, kindly, that's ly used to form adverbs from adjectives. And this rule is it analogical to different and most situations in real life. So we will be talking about modeling, and this criteria will be your focus when you're selecting AGM materials. And lastly, avoiding synonymic grammar features. You will be selecting active grammatical minimum according to the features, and your materials should include only one feature from synonymic row. For example, if it's must, the synonym is have to, and you don't have the long list of synonymic grammatical patterns for you to be here, to be teaching here. There are only two criteria for choosing passive grammatical minimum. One is criteria of wide usage in the written style of speech. And pay attention, I'm saying written style of speech, but not oral. So passive grammatical minimum mostly refers to written speech. And the second criterion is polysemantics. So passive grammatical minimum is usually dealing with the structures and patterns which have multiple meanings and is used in written speech. When we are selecting grammar materials to teach, we look at the grammar cases for all our speech of students, and it is really selected from live materials that is really related to our real life everyday situations. The speakers, native speakers, speeches of fictional heroes and book characters, TV show characters, I mean, real life show actors, and everyone's speech. And we have passive grammar minimum, which is selected from written text and written speech of students. And these are the elective grammar cases reflecting written way of speech. Active minimum is selected for first and seventh grades, and passive grammar is mostly selected for a little bit higher level students. When we come to speaking about requirements of CFR to assess grammar, we usually here in this lecture, we're focusing on A1 level learners. So our focus here is to assess grammar accuracy of A1 level learner. So A1 level learner, what can they do? They can show only limited control of a few simple grammatical structures and sentence patterns in a learned repertoire. And keep in mind that I am quoting CFR document here when we're talking about can-do statements and grammar competence of A1 level learners according to the CFR document. Grammatical competence according to state standard for teaching languages focuses on three aspects. First of which is parts of speech. They are competent in using basic rules of syntax and present and past tense verb forms, etc. So we're talking about basic grammatical patterns here. According to the state standard, grammatical competence is a learner can use simple grammatical and syntactic structures in communicative situations. They can connect words and phrases with the conjunction and, pay attention to this point, correctly narrate sentences using verb forms and simple sentence and describe stories and events in the correct sequence. So this is what A1 level learners can do in grammatical competence. In grade one, grammar phenomena are presented via lexical approach. So the focus usually here is the lexicology, the vocabulary students learn, and grammar phenomena is usually taught through lexical resources. And if you pay attention to my slide, I have provided multiple lexical resources through which you can teach grammar phenomena to your A1 level learners. And now, how to teach grammar to young learners? Because when we say, in this lecture, when we say A1, we usually mean first and fourth grade students at this point. Can we teach grammar to young learners? Basic questions. So, what type of grammar should we teach to young learners? What type of activities are appropriate? So, we should first answer these two questions from methodological point of view. Do children learn differently from adults? Yes. Theories about how young children learn are not different from theories about how teenagers and adults learn language, therefore grammar. But there are special considerations regarding how children learn everything. So it's different. English for young learners. Teachers should keep in mind that children have an amazing ability to absorb everything new. They don't understand your abstract concepts and theories. They will learn best by playing, singing, and using language in real situations, and for fun, not by explanation. They interpret meaning without necessarily understanding the individual words. They learn indirectly rather than directly. So if you think about this, you're teaching grammar, but actually your children are not noticing that you're teaching this grammar to them. So what else these teachers should remember? Very young and young learners, you know the difference in these ages, need to be praised, or else they will give up your class. They can use language before they understand clearly. See, your students can just repeat after you without even understanding what they're talking about. They need to be absolutely sure of what to do. So you need to give clear instructions when you're going to give instructions to them. They learn through their eyes, ears, hands, and their senses. They're very physical at this point. They get easily bored and need variety of tasks, rules, activities, everything in your class. They cannot concentrate for a long time on one thing, and that means your activity should always be a minimum time limited. Your children cannot always differentiate fact from fiction. So keep in mind that they cannot just identify this is a fact, this is a fiction, this is an opinion. So be sure that you are differentiating it for them. They don't always ask questions, they pretend to understand. This is one of the peculiarities that kids have. They always pretend to understand you, and sometimes they have a zero comprehension. Remember also that children change dramatically from one year to the next. So your kids at the first grade will be completely different from the second grade, and the same situation for third and fourth grades. There is a question. Should the focus of grammar teaching for the young learners be on form, on meaning, or on use? I'll answer that. First of all, this is a false question. Attention to all three is warranted, but in order for it to work, teaching techniques must be appropriate for young learners. I mean, presentation, practice, and production should be ensured. Every stage in your class should be there. There is an approach called eclectic approach for teaching grammar, and this is a desirable, coherent, pluralistic approach to language teaching, which involves the use of a variety of language learning activities, and each of which may have very different characteristics and may be motivated by different underlying assumptions. So this is not my definition. I'm quoting Larson, Freeman, and Mello, but this is a really one of the golden approaches to teach grammar to children. Through an eclectic approach, you will be you will be varying children's learning styles, and these learning styles will be considered. In this approach, meaningful communication is the main focus for your language learning class. Grammar is seen as an integral part of meaningful communication. So, grammar is not your focus is the communication. Children's social skills and physical activities, thinking skills, creativity, and personalization can get combined in one activity and in one 60-minute class. So the important things when you teach grammar in primary school, the key principles that teachers can always keep in mind are context first, and the second one, you should always make it simple, and you should always consider the learning styles which are different from student to student. The games always will be your golden takeout, get away from your boring grammatical rule explanations, and of course, revision. Children tend to forget everything very easily and very quickly, so you need a constant revision, and especially with the help of the games, so that your students can remember this rules and grammar patterns. Children cannot understand abstract concepts, schemes, and apply grammar rules. They will not understand your formulae. You cannot just have them sit and listen to the rules, and you cannot make them write down these rules. It won't work with the kids. They do need a clear, meaningful context, which you provide for teaching this grammatical pattern. It can be a situation to start out, a, a rule that they can deduce themselves, they can figure out the rule themselves. This way, they will remember it better. The context will help them to connect the language to a specific situation. They will be able to find patterns in this real life situations. Teaching should be theme based. Every lesson should be a theme, should be a context. They listen to the dialect where the target language is used. Let's say you're teaching present simple, but you can tell a story. It's a one day in a puppet's life or one day in your life, and you're telling it from a puppet's voice, and it's really interesting and meaningful, and it's context based. And this way, your students will remember present simple better than when you explain a grammar pattern with the help of a structure or a rule. Make it simple. The language you use to set a context, clarify the rules. Focus on the grammatical form, should be graded according to the student's level. Be sure you make it simple for your students. Always consider your students' learning styles, which are usually most of the time different. We have visual learners, we have auditory learners, we have kinesthetic learners, and we always learn differently. Consider and plan your activities and lesson plans according to these learning styles of your students. So we have different ideas to teach grammar patterns to kids, and one of the examples I came up with to show you was snowball. Um, Games like snowball and other games, they will motivate your students. Your students will not consciously see whether they're learning it. They will just learn this grammar pattern with the help of your game. See, for example, if you're playing snowball and the topic is present simple, you say a sentence, have the student repeat your sentence and add the next part. And with the help of a snowball, you throw it, your student says it back and throws it back or throws it to the next student. They're playing a game while they're repeating and learning and figuring out the rule themselves. I have some more examples for games for teaching grammar. I have a chain game, I have a zip zap game, knots and crosses, board games, games like true false and miming, games of like role plays. I mean, there are hundreds of games uh, on board in teachers' resources that you can always use to teach grammar to your kids. And revision, yes, young learners need to review the material from time to time. The new language should be revised every next lesson should be recycled throughout the course. In addition, you should always check their progress. You should always have a revision test for lessons for every unit. Your students should revise it, and with the help of revision, they will strengthen the usage and understanding of this grammar rule, even when you don't explain it like a formula. So I have some questions for you to consider for your lecture seminar preparation. I really want you to focus on and answer the question, what is grammar? What do we mean by the active and passive grammar minimum? If you remember, we talked about this. And think over the grammar item, criteria, and source of selection. And I really want you to focus on one or two grammar teaching games for children aged at this age range, and leveled A1, and you come up with your example of grammar teaching game for kids. Thank you for your attention. This was our lecture on teaching grammar to A1 level learners. See you in our next lectures. Bye bye.